Hey, Brentview, I want to welcome you to another time of reflection on the sermon series we're in, Eyewitness, and wanted to let you know that our stream actually malfunctioned this week, which doesn't happen often, but once in a while we've got to flex, and what you're going to notice is towards the end of the message, I'm actually reteaching the content, and I'm doing that just because I know a lot of you catch up this way, and a lot of you engage when you're out of town and these sorts of things. So that said, if the stage looks a hair different or anything along the way, now you know why. Let's go ahead and jump into today's message. Have you ever had a nickname? I bet you have. I bet some of you like it and some of you don't. Nicknames are interesting, right? They emerge in weird situations with inside jokes. A nickname might come as an insult, unfortunately, but often nicknames are good. Some nicknames are actually really good. Like the one I had as a young child that didn't scar me at all, Curdy Birdie. That was what I was called, Curdy Birdie, in grade 3, 4, and 5-ish. And at one point, this kid named Marco, who was a bit of a rapscallion, as I like to say. Don't you love that word, rapscallion? Yes, it's a great classic word. He drew a picture that was apparently of me with a bird face, and he wrote birdie on there, but he wrote B-I-R-D-Y, or actually, he was supposed to do B-R-I, I can't say words. He was supposed to spell birdie, but he spelled bridie instead, right? Now, what do you think my nickname became after that moment? Well, it became Bridie, and I don't even know. So for like 3 years, all the kids in school would call me Bridie, and people would be like, why is he called Bridie? I thought he was called Kurt, and no one knew why, but it was an inside joke. Even into junior high and high school, the few friends that transitioned with me to those spaces, once in a while, I'd get called Bird or Bridie, but people around us at that stage are like, what an odd thing to say. You guys are weird, like socially, what's going on here? But nicknames are like that. They shape us. They kind of tell a story about who we are or how we see ourselves or how other people see us. Nicknames like that are sometimes endearing. It wasn't an insult by the time it became my nickname. It was, hey, we see you. You're our friend, so we're going to call you something weird, And honestly, I preferred Bridie or Curdy Birdie to the nickname I had had prior to that, which was Butterfingers, because as a young kid, I couldn't catch a ball. So I'll take it, right? So nicknames, they tell us a story about ourselves. And there's a lot of different nicknames, right? I call my children often, I'll call them Kiddo. They seem to like that. Or maybe you have a special someone that you call Hun. A little, hey, hun. Or babe, or bro, or buddy, or cutie, or boss. If someone's a boss, you just let them know, you're a boss, man. Yeah. Usually that's a good thing, but, whatever. Sometimes nicknames really have a deep impact on us. Some people actually will go by their nicknames, and that's actually part of their identity. And it's interesting because I think nicknames are one example of many things that make up the story we tell about ourselves to ourselves in our mind and in our heart. We're constantly narrating our own sort of identity internally, and often that happens in the background. We don't actually constantly think, how do I see myself today? What do I think about myself? But in the background of who we are and how we think about the world, we sometimes, we narrate a story of identity to ourselves. And sometimes nicknames are great. Like you think about the Apostle Peter, he gets named by Jesus Rock. Or if you want to be playful, Rocky, right? I mean, what kind of name is that? Like, I think he walked around for the rest of his life being like, yeah, I'm kind of a big deal. Jesus said I was a rock, like that probably shaped him. And so, like nicknames, we're shaped by the stories others tell about us or the stories we tell about ourselves to ourselves. And what I want to talk about today a little bit is this idea that the story you tell about yourself influences everything you do. the story you tell about yourself influences everything that you do. You're a combination, for instance, of your best moments and your worst moments. And how you hold those realities together narrates a story about yourself to yourself. Sometimes we're really fixated on the worst parts of ourselves, and so we have self-identity stuff that comes up, and where we don't feel worthy, we don't feel like we should belong, because the worst parts of ourselves are the parts that we highlight internally to ourselves. But here's the deal. Jesus invites us to step into a story with him that shapes our imagination to live in the world radically differently than we would without him. He invites us to experience the power and presence of his resurrection each and every day. And if we can do that, if we can step into our lives being defined and redefined by Jesus himself, we'll find that we no longer live out of a lack of who we are. And we lean into who Jesus sees us and how Jesus calls us into the world. Last week we talked about the words that we say. Today we're going to talk about the story that we tell ourselves and the actions that kind of flow from there. And we're in part 2 of a series called Eyewitness, Stories of the Resurrected Jesus. And so for the next few minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to explore how encountering the resurrected Jesus shapes who we become and how we tell the story of who we're becoming. So last week, we looked at the resurrection appearance of Jesus. Jesus shows up in a room where there's disciples present, you might remember, and he says, "Peace be with you." His first words to them are, "Peace be with you." The text told us that the disciples were there and they were afraid, and so the best thing Jesus could have told them in that moment was peace. It made a powerful impact. And what we're going to notice today is actually those words impact how Jesus steps into lots of spaces with these disciples. And we're going to move towards a very specific way that Jesus' words to one of his disciples brings deep and profound life. Now, up to this moment, Jesus has shown up a couple of places. He now is at the lake, and he's at the shore, and he does a couple of things. There's a miraculous catch of fish that happens with some disciples. And after that, he turns to Peter, and they have a bit of a chat. Now, if you remember the backstory of Peter, he has a few days prior, a bit prior, what has he done? When Jesus was being executed, he denied Jesus 3 times. You remember this, if you've read the gospel story. 3 times, as Jesus predicts to him, he denies Jesus in Jesus' worst moment. And you can imagine that after Jesus rises and Peter sees him and all of that, he's overjoyed, of course, but he's also very likely holding shame. He's probably narrating a story to himself about how he's not good, he did the wrong thing. It was probably his worst moment in his life, and he's just holding on to shame. And we do that. We do something wrong and we hold on to shame. We just do that as creatures. And Jesus is going to step in, and I think what we'll see is that he's going to retell the story a different way, or at least invite Peter to retell the story in a different way. So this is in John chapter 21, the last chapter of the Gospel of John, a biography of Jesus, and this is what it says. When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord. You know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." I think we need to notice that Peter, right, in this situation is fishing. He's not for 3 years, he'd been following Jesus, maybe fishing as they needed to catch food along the way, but he wasn't doing this as his core vocation. He was following Jesus as his core vocation, and he's back to what he was good at before he was following Jesus. He's now, I've got to fish, I've got to make a living. And it's funny to me because you would think he was pretty good at this if this was his profession, but really the good catches are all miracles. So I don't know, maybe he just was okay at fishing, but he's doing this. And in this moment, Jesus looks at him and says, hey, you need to know your purpose. You are to metaphorically feed my lambs. Now, Jesus isn't a farmer with a flock, right? This is about people. This is about Peter extending Jesus' mission of love to others. It's going to keep going in verse 16. Jesus asked a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Simon replied, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Jesus said to him, take care of my sheep. A little redundant, but he's going to keep going, right? One more time. He asked a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was sad that Jesus asked him a third time, do you love me? He replied, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Peter is wrestling with his own identity, his own denial, and so Jesus comes to him and he reasserts the relationship as many times as Peter had fractured it with his denial. He says 3 times, do you love me? And in that moment, what Jesus is doing is saying, the story you're telling yourself about who you are and how you are when it comes to our relationship, that doesn't get to have the final word. That doesn't have to win. I need you to tell me that you're not a denier, you are someone who loves me. And it wasn't just for Jesus' benefit, right? Jesus didn't need to hear this as much as Peter needed to say it. Because when he was saying it, his identity and the story that he's going to tell himself is now being altered in this moment. And what we see here, I think, in the story as a starting place, as we think about this idea of the story we tell, is that Jesus helps us to re-narrate our story, just like he did for Peter. Jesus helps us to re-narrate our story. The story of betrayal, a story of weakness, it doesn't have to win. Peter needs to hear, Peter needs to speak a different reality into being. It's kind of funny, when you read this, if you just read it by itself, you didn't know the whole story, you didn't know about the 3, denials and the 3 sort of restoration points, you would probably think to yourself, this is like a game of weird Marco Polo, right? Thinking about summer. Any of you ever play Marco Polo in the pool? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, it's kind of like, Marco, do you love me? Polo, yeah, I do. Mark, right? And it's are we not hitting the mark here? But sometimes I'm dense, so I have to hear things over and over and over and over for it to actually hit me in the right way. You know what I mean? And I think Peter must be a little dense in this way because he has to play this holy Marco Polo for a little bit until it finally starts to sink in, at least somewhat. And I wonder, does Peter need to know that he's worthy of the task of feeding those sheep? Have you ever been struggling and wondering, am I worthy of being helpful and being good in the world because I don't feel as though I'm good or helpful as a person? And so how could I be invited to be part of something significant if I can't even ... Peter needs to know that Jesus sees him as worthy. And I wonder, without this moment, would Peter have been set up to be a world changer? I mean, Peter is someone who extends the story all the way to Rome. He ends up being a pastor in Rome, leading the church there. And I just wonder, like, without this moment with Jesus where he is restored and his story is re-narrated into a different story than the shame would want to hold him down in, how does this thing play out? How does church history play out? Jesus saw all of Peter. And I want you to know that Jesus sees all of you. Like, yes, you have done bad things in your life and things are hard and it is not always easy. But here's the thing. Jesus knows that you aren't the sum total of the worst moments of your life. You are loved. And Jesus wants you to see with clarity that all you have to do is say yes to love and start living as though it's true and let it come into the core of who you are. How lovely and hard at the same time is that? The story keeps going because, it would be nice, right, if Peter just got it in that moment. But it's a little shaky, right? Like, it's going to take Peter a little while, I think, and it takes us a little while to really have our story sort of reshaped around a God of love and a mission to love the world with God, right? Like that takes a while. And so it keeps on going, and verse 18 says this. He doesn't just say, feed my sheep. It keeps going, and he says, I assure you that when you were younger, you tied your own belt and walked around wherever you wanted. When you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will tie your belt and lead you where you don't want to go. He said this to show the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After saying this, Jesus said to Peter, follow me. Follow me. So it's not just, Peter, go do this awesome, significant thing. It's go do this awesome, significant thing, but no, it doesn't mean just happiness and roses all the time. That's the other hard part about Jesus, right? Like, he makes life better, but he also doesn't guarantee ease and perfection. He invites us into faithfulness so that we know without a shadow of a doubt that we are truly loved and have purpose and meaning in the world. But I'll tell you what, it certainly isn't always going to be easy. What I think we see in this story is another big idea here, is that follow me, as Jesus says repeatedly, follow me is an invitation to humble significance. Follow me is an invitation to humble significance. I want to break down humble and I want to break down significance briefly here, right? So humble is this idea that you can be confident without being arrogant, right? So humility isn't like hiding the fact that you might be good at something. It's not gloating that you're good at something, right? You're not prideful. You're not arrogant. You're not a jerk, basically, right? So be humble. Like, understand who you are and don't think higher of yourself than you ought, as another place in the Bible says. But certainly don't live in this idea of like you're nothing, you're shame, you're all that. So humble just sort of keeps us grounded in reality. And then significance is about saying, I can live in such a way that my life matters more than just for me. Significance is about saying the way that I live can actually make an impact, a mark on the world. And it doesn't have to be in ways that when I die, they name a building after me or whatever. Like, that's fine if that happens. If you all, when I pass, whenever that is, right, you name this church Kurt Willems Church, I'll probably throw up in my grave. But, it's not about that. But it is about saying, we can partner with God and feeding the sheep of this world. Like, we can partner with God and really doing something special. And if our narrated story about who we are and how we are is a mess, then we're going to struggle to live into a humbly significant story of following Jesus. But we're designed this way. Deep in our bones, we have an ache for something bigger than ourselves. And that ache points us to a God of love, and that ache invites us to love others like that God loves. And it influences everything. The story you tell about yourself influences everything you do. And as I hinted at a bit earlier, Peter is still trying to sort this out. The story actually has another excellent, fun part to it, I think. He's still maturing. Verse 20 tells us about the struggle to humble significance. This is what he says, or what it says. Peter turned around and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them. So, as a reminder, in John's gospel, the disciple that Jesus loved is a encoded way of John talking about himself, right? So throughout the gospel, this is how John will speak of himself. And so Peter is there having this conversation with Jesus. He turns and, there's John. When Peter saw this disciple, he said to Jesus, "What about Lord? What about him?" Jesus replied, "What if I want him to remain until I come? What difference does that make to you? You must follow me." It's really funny. When I read this story, one of the first things that came to my mind was how my kids sometimes ask this question: "Dad, who do you love more?" Have you ever been there? Have you ever had kids? Have you ever had to answer a question like this? My kids have asked, they want the ranking. They want to know, where do they line up? And Peter in this situation is like, look, Jesus, yes, I get it. I'm going to have it bad. But what about this guy? What about this other guy? How is he going to have it? And well, the truth is, Peter's going to have it really bad when he dies, and John's going to live to be old. And so get over it, Jesus says, it's not about the other person. It's not about where you rank. It's about this. I love you, and this is for you. And I think one of the things that we've got to really wrestle with, John has his own story. Peter has his own story. You have your own story. Don't confuse someone else's story, what looks like happiness, what looks like success, what looks like something better, with the story you tell yourself about yourself. Because when we compare, we're really just kind of missing the point. In fact, I would say it this way: that comparison is sometimes a symptom of a deficient story. Comparison is sometimes a symptom of a deficient story. The person next to me doesn't determine my value. God determined my value when I was created, and God redeemed my value when I was saved and became a follower of Jesus. We have to tell ourselves a better story that doesn't compare ourselves to everyone else around us, because here's the deal. It's about you, not about them. And when we fall into the comparison trap, when we're struggling with just really bad stories in general, here's a quote that I come back to. You'll hear me quote it again, I promise. I've quoted it once before already at Brentview. It's from the spiritual writer James Bryan Smith, and he says this about our stories. He says, "We are shaped by our stories. In fact, our stories, once in place, determine much of our behavior without regard to their accuracy or helpfulness. Once these stories are stored in our minds, they stay there largely unchallenged until the day we die. And here is the main point. These narratives are running and often ruining our lives. That is why it is crucial to get the right narratives. And I think this is true, that stories have the potential in the background. We don't always notice it, but they can run our lives in the background and they can ruin our lives in the background as they manifest in the foreground. We don't need to be asking questions all the time, like, what about that person? What about my struggle? Why is my struggle so bad compared to that person? Or what about the worst thing I've ever done? I can't possibly be worthy of that kind of love. I can't possibly be worthy of this kind of significance in the world, this humble significance of following Jesus on mission. And Jesus simply responds to Peter, and I believe he responds to each one of you this way: follow me and feed my sheep. So, as you think about your life, as you think about the life that you're living right now, which story is running your life? What narrative, what internal thought life is running your life, whether it be in the background or right in the heart of what you're up to? Because here's the deal. We need to understand that as a story is in the background of our life, it can be messing with all sorts of hope and possibilities that we could have had we leaned in to the way of Jesus and how he wants to narrate that story. So here's a few things you can do as you wrestle with this idea of which story might be running your life. It's important that you identify it, that you actually do the hard work of getting calm and reflective and just simply saying, I think there is this element of my story and that element of my story as I interpret it in my own thought life that I need to identify. Notice recent examples of how it plays out. It's important not just to say, hey, I think this might be true, but then take it to the concrete level. And then finally, and this is the part that takes tons of intentionality, and it's a process, but invite Jesus to re-narrate that story. Here's the deal. The story you tell about yourself influences everything you do. But we won't know unless we slow down long enough to really wrestle with what elements of that story are broken and what elements of that story need to be redeemed and healed by a God of love. We need to have something that might be in the background brought into our awareness in the foreground and then to deal with it. So, what if we followed the example of Peter and chose to believe and live a better story? What if we actually took up the cross like Peter would at the end of his life? He doesn't merely die, he dies proclaiming a better story. About 64 AD, we have historic knowledge that there's a great fire that breaks out in Rome, and Peter is living in Rome at this time. He's overseeing church ministry in Rome. And during this fire, Nero decides to blame this small little group that very few people know about, the Christians. And so they'll be burned alive. They'll be thrown to lions. They'll be dragged through the streets during Nero's campaign to sort of clear his name and scapegoat the followers of Jesus in the city. One early church theologian says that during this time, Peter dies, and this is what Origen had to write a couple hundred years later. He said, Peter was crucified at Rome with his head downwards as he himself had desired to suffer. You see, the Peter who was afraid of the crucifixion moment when it was Jesus dying for him and who denied him 3 times is the same Peter that would be restored 3 times. And in his restoration, he chose, instead of cowardice, to run his life or fear or even, guilt and shame. He said, no, Jesus has restored me, and now I live a courageous story from faithfulness, or from fear to faithfulness, from folly to humble significance. Imagine if we allowed that same God that Peter met at the shores of Galilee to re-narrate our stories. Imagine if together we said the lies that we have running our lives in the background do not get the final word. Imagine a better version of your life that starts at this moment as you walk out of this building, because that is the life that God wants for you. Jesus says, follow me. You have that invitation in this moment. You can tell yourself a better story, not just in fluff, not just because it feels nice, but because God already is telling you something better. You are loved. You get to respond with that love towards God. And you simply get to hear the words of Jesus. Follow me, feed my sheep. Jesus says, you have what it takes to do those things with him. Let's pray. And so, Jesus, we thank you. We thank you that you are good, that you see us in all of our complexity, all of our struggles, all of the hard stuff, and you say, you are loved, follow me. Where we struggle, where we have been told lies about our value, our worth, where we live in guilt for past things that we've already received forgiveness for from you, help us to step towards your invitation to be a follower, your invitation to live a better story because you are telling a better story about us. We can join you in your mission of healing the world. So God, would you heal us from the inside out? In Jesus' name, amen.